I'm almost 50, strong, clear, energized. Training hard, living clean, fully alive. But it didn't start here. 30 years ago, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and I felt hopeless. But I chose a different path. No meds, just science, discipline, and results. Now I'm symptom-free and asking the tough questions that move us all forward. This is Hope and Health. Let's go. Hello and welcome to Hope and Health. Today we're talking to Jessica Faulds, an MS warrior, a plant-based nutritional expert, and motivational speaker who uses her diagnosis with multiple sclerosis to inspire others. Jessica, thanks so much for being on our podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Now let's start right at the beginning. Diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Can you tell us about what happened, when it was?
So I'm in year 19 since my diagnosis, which always freaks people out, and they always ask how old I am. So I was diagnosed when I was 15 years old.
Okay.
I woke up one morning and my left eye had frozen in place, so it had stopped moving. And I managed to hide it from my parents for the day.
Okay.
And I stayed in bed and I hid it from them. And then I remember being at the dinner table. We had gone out for fish or chips or something. And my dad wasn't there. So my mom, my sister, and I, my grandparents. And my mom was like, "Can you just look at me normally?" Because I was doing this. I was like, there's nothing wrong. And she looked at my eye and she said, "Cool, we're going to the hospital." And my grandparents took my sister home. She took us to the local hospital. And as we were driving to the hospital, the song Double Vision by Foreigner came on. And my mom went, this kind of describes you right now. So we went to the emergency room and they told me that it had coincided with playing my first video game the night before. So they thought my eye was tired. And they had said, if it's not fixed by Monday, go to an eye doctor. So we went to an eye doctor who was not a regular eye doctor. And I still remember he was shaking as he examined me. And he just kept going, "Oh no, this is not good." And then at 15 years old, he told me that I had a brain tumor or I was diabetic. And then he dragged, this is 2007. So he dragged my mom out into the waiting room and handed her a phone book and said, "Call your family doctor." And my family doctor tried to calm my mom down, saying it's impossible to diagnose a brain tumor by looking at someone's eye. And we got into my family doctor who got us into Sick Kids who within a month had told me they were 90% sure it was MS. But you have to show a progression. So I had to then go back 3 months later. And that's when they were like, "Oh no, it's 100% MS.
So you had an MRI at that time and all the tests?
Yeah, I had about 3 MRIs.
Got it. So at that time, what were the options they gave you?
So I was given the choice of 4 different disease-modifying therapies. Most of the time, in 2007, there were more, but they were not approved for children. Mm-hmm. So you had to wait till I turned 18 before I had access to those. So I ended up going on a drug called beta-seron.
Yep.
I did 3.5 years of that, basically. It did a pretty good job. I was having about a relapse a year, but I actually rejected injections. So I ended up getting nerve damage in both legs from the act of actually giving myself needles, not the medication. The medication was fine and it was working, but giving myself the injections ended up giving me nerve damage. So I had to stop the injections when I turned 18.
Got it. So at that time, what were your parents? Were they scared? Was it a panic situation for the family?
I remember my mom crying. I remember the day we got home from the eye doctor and my grandfather was there and my dad was there and everyone was crying. I remember going to Sick Kids Hospital. But from day one, my parents have said, "You're in charge." So I have fantastic parents. So when they were like, "These are your options," my parents go, "You read everything on the medication. You come to us and tell us which one you want to do and we'll have a discussion." And that's how it was for my entire life. They said, "You tell us what you want to do, you do the research, we'll have a discussion." So they were pretty good. They were the first couple of times we had to do needles, not so fun.
Right.
That was my mom was crying, I was crying, there's a lot of screaming. But they've been there every step of the way. And I've had so many things go wrong health-wise that they are troopers. They are big troopers.
Now, at 15 years old, you're in grade 10 at the time?
I was in grade 9.
Grade 9?
Yeah, it was the end of grade 9.
What was it like for you?
It was weird because I think kids are resilient. So it just becomes a new normal. I had friends in high school who I think struggled with it. She's still my best friend to this day. Her name's Cheyenne. She used to walk behind me up every flight of stairs in case I fell down the stairs. That was her biggest fear.
And for you, how did it progress for you? Like, what kind of options did you start to take? Did you continue drugs therapy? And
Yep. So I've continued drug therapy basically until I did my transplant.
yeah.
So when I was 18, I talked to a doctor and I said, I want to go on Tysabri. And he loved that because he was studying Tysabri. Tysabri worked for about 3 years for me. But I am like the JVC antibody positive. So then it puts you at a high risk for brain infection. So I said, I don't want to do that anymore. Then I tried Gilenya, which was not a good fit for me. Then I did Lemtrada. And there's a little asterisk with Lemtrada, and it says, so my first year when I did Lemtrada, I ended up getting Legionnaire's disease and necrotizing pneumonia, and I ended up in the hospital for 3 weeks.
Wow.
With 10% use of my lungs.
Jeez.
So when I say, like, when things go wrong, my parents are like, if something's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong for Jess. But 3 months after that, I ran my first half marathon.
Okay.
So I bounced back pretty quick. And it was kind of through that. So I started the Tysabri when I was in university. I did for my first degree. And while I was doing that degree, that's when I took my first nutrition course. So I started doing the nutrition and physical fitness alongside the disease modifying therapies.
Right.
And I just kind of went off the deep end into the nutrition research, and I ended up doing a second degree in nutrition.
Wow.
And then I did my holistic certification in nutrition. And so everything, like, I've done the disease modifying therapies. Unfortunately, Lemtrada didn't work for me either. My disease was still progressing no matter what diet I had, no matter what DMT I was on. So I ended up doing a transplant in Calgary in 2019.
Wow. Okay. So let's get into that.
Okay.
Transplant.
Yeah.
I mean, again, the MS community, really tight community.
Yeah.
There's different types of different procedures people have. What led you to, I'm assuming it's
Yes.
And so can you define what that is for our audience?
Yes.
And what got you there?
So I had what is called an autologous hemopoietic transplant. So autologous means it's my own. So I did not steal from anybody. I did not have a donor. They are my hemopoietic. They are gathered from my blood. So what happened was, I'm originally from Ontario, and I came out here to Calgary because of they used to have summer camps for kids with MS. And so the MS Society had them in Ontario for the first 6 years, and my final year that I could go to camp, there was one out here in Calgary. So I came to the one in Calgary, told my mom I was going to move out here. I moved out here January 1st, 2018. When I moved here, I got a brand new neurologist who was very, I would say he's like young and hip and with it, very progressive. He's always been like good on the diet, like exercise, up on that. And I did an MRI for him. And he called me 2 weeks before Christmas in 2018 and said, your MRI is showing progression that we don't like to see after Lemtrada. It shouldn't be progressing this way. I want you to do a transplant. I want you to consider it. We're doing them here. You'd be part of a trial. And I, for lack of a better word, told him to pound sand. I said, I've done everything you guys have told me to for the last 13 years. I've done every treatment. I've eaten all the good things. I'm done. And he said, well, think about it over the holidays. Talk to your parents. So again, it's like we've done for the last 15 years. I went home to my parents. We talked about it. And they said, hey, we'll fly out and we'll go see the doctor in February with you. And we ultimately decided to do it. As long as I was able to preserve my fertility, I was okay to do it. And that was like the big thing. I wanted to be able to preserve my fertility because we knew that it was going to affect my fertility. So we did that. So in 2019, in February, I started the stem cell process. That is also the month that I met my fiance. So if you want trial by fire, chemo. And so in April, May of 2019, I was able to successfully harvest about 20 eggs. So they're somewhere on ice in Calgary. And then in June, I did my first round of chemotherapy. And what they did was you do the chemo. Then I did what are called GCSF shots every day. GCSF shots are designed to pull your from your bone marrow into your bloodstream, so it's easy to harvest. So I did that for 5 days. And every day I was cleaning my port and I was doing everything right. And I had a terrible rash. It was not working. They thought I was still having an allergic reaction to the Band-Aid adhesive. So then on the 6th day, you go in and they did a blood count. And they said, you have enough to harvest. We're going to send you up to the harvest room. So I got sent up to this room. And they said like my numbers were incredible and they were shocked. So we did the whole harvest. And then they said my reaction was bad enough in the port that they're like, we're going to take the port out because you can do the rest of the thing with a PICC line instead of a port. So they took the port out, which I loved because I could go back to boxing for 3 weeks until we did everything else. 3 weeks later, my parents drove across the country to stay with me for 6 weeks. They put a PICC line in my bicep. And they said, we're going to be real smart about this time. No Band-Aids. We're going to wrap you in gauze. So they put the PICC line in. They said, come back on Monday. We'll start everything else. And that night, my arm started swelling from the PICC line. And when we were trying to cut the gauze off, as we went to the hospital, I cut the line. So we got to the hospital. They had to take the line out because I had cut it. And that's when they figured out I'm also allergic to what they clean you with at the hospital. So we had to have another PICC line in, no chlorhexidine, only iodine. And then I got admitted to the hospital basically for a month. And in that time, you do 11 rounds of chemotherapy in 8 days. So they would come in and they would hook me up to the chemo every day. And it is, like I said, it's 11 rounds in 8 days. For me, I think it was in around day 7 or 8. No, it was day 3 or 4. They came in and they said, hey, we need you to stop flossing your teeth. And I was like, this is a weird request. Why? Mm-hmm. And they said, if your platelet count drops below 50, you're not allowed to floss your teeth because your blood won't clot. So if you kind of nick your gums, it's not a good thing. So I said, okay, fine. I won't floss my teeth. Not a hardship. And then a couple of days later, they came in as I'm still doing all this chemo. And they said, we need to give you a blood transfusion, but we've run out of your blood type. So I have a rare blood type. I'm A negative. They said, so we want to give you A positive with the medication. And I said, statistically speaking, things tend to go wrong for me. So like, what if we don't do that? Like and they said, well, your platelet count is currently 4. And I was like, I'll take the blood. So I ended up getting the blood transfusion. And then after you do the 11 rounds of chemotherapy, I describe it as like an Indiana Jones moment because there's that one Indiana Jones movie where they carry the guy in on their shoulders. Mm-hmm. There was like 4 or 5 medical professionals come in with my in this like little cradle thing, defrosting them. And they hooked it up to your IV. At this point, my line had blown again, so I had a newer line in. And they sit there and they just watch you for 15 minutes as the go in. They're concerned about a reaction with the preservative. And then they go like, high five, you did it, bye. And they just leave. And that's it. It's the most anticlimactic moment you could ever imagine. My parents brought balloons. We had a great party. But then you're just waiting for your counts to hit a level where they're allowed to release you. Mm-hmm. So my counts pretty much quadrupled within 48 hours and I was able to go home. It is a false sense of hope going home because you will have then a dip and you go back in the hospital. And then I was allowed, I think all in all, I was released permanently within 8 days. That's not normal. That is, so my, from the time that I did my, like I said, when I was doing the GCSF shots, I was running 7-8K a day. I was still boxing with the port and the nurse got really mad at me for that one. So when I got released from the hospital, within a week and a half of my transplant, I was back to boxing. And the doctors how it works with your follow-up is you get released and then they say, okay, you have to come back every day. Then you have to come back every other day. And then like twice a week. And then once a week, and they stretch it out and you hit these mile markers. And this is when you get to, and they would fight over me. They'd be like, what did you do today? How much exercise did you do? What are you eating? Like, how are things going? Because I was like just knocking off the milestones. And I'd be like, my milestone is when is my hair coming back, please? But I was recovering faster than they had. They said I hold the record for the fastest recovery. I was back to work within 5 weeks. I went back to like a slow return to work. I was back in the gym within like a week and a half. We had to wait. I wasn't allowed to drive for 30 days. So my mom had gone home because she was a realtor. So it was a really busy time for us. And my dad stayed for the last couple of weeks. And we had asked the doctor, we're like, if she's allowed to drive, is he allowed to go home? Because I don't need 24-hour supervision anymore. And the doctor said yes. And I still remember this. We asked him, I said, okay, well, while she was on chemo, I have a dog. Her name's Nutella. They're like, she hasn't been allowed to pick up Nutella's poop. Is she allowed to do that now? Because that was one of the big markers.
Sure, yeah.
And he goes, well, as long as she doesn't use her bare hands. And we're like, do you know people who do that? Right. Like, so we had just marked off all of these things. My dad went back within, like, he was able to make it home for my parents' wedding anniversary. Like, people were astounded. But I was just recovering so quickly. And that was about 6.5 years ago. And I've had nothing since.
Okay. So if we back this up, so you're diagnosed at 15.
Yeah.
You're trying DMTs, you're trying different nutritional paths. Nothing seems to be working. Now, could you feel yourself progressing, or was it the MRIs, or was it actually your physical symptoms?
So it was a bit of both. So I will say, from the time I was diagnosed to this transplant was 13 years. And within those 13 years, I had lost feeling from my T8 vertebra down 3 times. I did have a very pimpin' purple cane for some of my life. But when I was in university, the first time I lost feeling in my legs, I had the cane for about 6 to 8 months of recovery afterwards. That's when I really got into the nutrition and the diet and exercise, and I was working out 4 or 5 times a week. And the next time I had the relapse, my recovery was under a month. And my recoveries have always been better when I'm eating well and exercising all the time. So I would have physical relapses, but I mostly go back to base after them with the steroids. But it was the MRIs. The MRIs, no matter what. Even if I didn't have a relapse, the MRIs were progressing.
And what nutritional paths did you try?
I tried a lot. I did the Terry Wahls protocol. I do have a story about cooking a cow heart, where I drove around town to like 8 different butchers when I lived in London, Ontario, trying to find a cow heart, and nobody had them. And I eventually found one, and I cut it all up, and I made a cow heart stew. And then I couldn't eat it, and I fed it to my roommate. And he loved it because he didn't have to pay for it.
Right.
He was like, tastes good, tastes fine, tastes like beef. And I said, I can't do it. So I did try the Terry Wahls protocol. I was vegetarian for a long time. I did like the gluten-free, dairy-free paleo style. But what really has worked for me is I basically follow a vegan plant-based diet.
Right.
And I feel better about that too, because I did meet a cow. And that's when my partner and I both started we're like, we don't need meat.
Now, were you vegan prior to the transplant?
So I would say I was vegetarian prior to the transplant. I was vegetarian, more plant-based. And we had started cutting out meat. That was the year we just started cutting out the meat. And Chuck, that's my partner, him and I both said, we don't need the meat. Even though we live in Alberta and cow town, we're like, we don't need it. So we had started cutting it out. When I was in hospital, I didn't eat a single thing that the hospital provided, and I ate completely plant-based, and my mom brought every meal. So she would call me in the morning, and she'd be like, what do you want right now? And then she would come and visit me, and then she'd go home and be like, what do you want for lunch? And then she'd go back up to my place, what do you want for dinner? And my parents brought every meal, which is funny because my mom doesn't remember doing that. And I said, I didn't eat a single thing that the hospital provided me. They would walk on my door, and they'd be like, do you want food? And I was like, get it out of my room. I will throw up.
Really?
And so I was mostly vegetarian at that point. And the final straw for me was actually after my mom had gone home. My very sweet father had asked me what I wanted for dinner. And I was craving tortellini. And I said, when you're going through chemo, what I will tell people, when you're craving things, just eat what you're craving because you don't want to eat anything. And so I was craving tortellini. And I said, can you get there's a cheese spinach, tortellini? And he said, yeah, for sure. And he went shopping without his glasses and bought chicken tortellini by mistake, and I was violently ill, super violently ill. And I was like, you know what, that's the final. It was I hadn't eaten meat in a while as it was, and that was the nail in the coffin. And I was like, nope, my body doesn't want it. So
you get the transplant. Did you notice changes right away?
Yes. So I'd always had numbness and kind of tingling in my feet. Like I said, I'd had issues at the T8, T10 vertebra. But it was showing on my MRI. So I've had MRIs since. I have an MRI. Right now I get them every other year instead of every year. And my doctor, my neurologist, he says as we hit milestones, it'll be every 3 years and every 5 years. And so my MRIs have shown improvement. And because I was diagnosed as a child, when I was a patient at Sickard's Hospital, I signed up for every study under the sun. I was like, go ahead, study me, whatever. And I was a part of this study back when I was 15 to about the time I moved here. So 25, 26. And then I said, hey, I'm moving away. If you still want to follow me, if I can do it in Calgary, I will. My whole family still lives in Ontario. So I said, when I come back. But we just kind of lost touch for a couple years. And so, about 3 years ago, my neurologist from my childhood, Dr. Banwell, she's the best neurologist I've ever met. She called me up and she said, I know your family still lives in Ontario, but I know you live in Calgary. Would you be willing, when you come back to visit them, to spend a day at St. Mike's Hospital so we can continue to follow you? Because you're the only one from the original study who's had a transplant.
Right.
And I said, yeah, for sure. So I go home to Ontario at least once a year. When I go, I fly in at night early. I go to stay in Toronto. We go to St. Mike's Hospital. And I just remember the first time that I went there, and they just have a neurologist come in and do your examination. He said, I can't tell that you had MS. If I didn't have your file right now, I wouldn't know that you had MS.
So you're just neurologically pristine from the testing.
Except for balance. Balance is still, but I've just always been a klutzy person.
So the numbness is gone?
Numbness is gone.
And no other symptoms since the transplant?
No symptoms, no progression. My MRIs are stable.
Now, did you have any other symptoms at all? Like, did you have any side effects from the transplant?
Menopause.
Okay.
So I entered menopause at 27.
Can you explain how that happened?
Yeah. So basically, when you the amount of chemotherapy that I did is, I don't know, like it was enormous. I did 11 rounds in 8 days. And normally when you talk to someone with cancer, a lot of people I've talked to, they go, oh, we do a round and then we have like a little bit of a break and then we do another round. This was every single day for 8 days. The one day I did 3 different types of chemo. And different types of chemo do different things. But they had told me before I did the transplant that basically the chemo would, for lack of a better word, nuke my like ovaries and my eggs. So any eggs or that I had in my ovaries, it just nukes them. And so I knew it was, they're like, there's a 90% chance that you're going to go. And they don't call it menopause when you're 27. This is a lesson that I learned. It was a phrase coined by a man, I will say, and they call it ovarian failure, which I think sounds worse because I beat MS and now I have ovarian failure. But within about a month of me doing all the chemo, I started having severe hot flashes. I started having like heartburn for the first time. And I went to my hematologist and I said, I'm in menopause and we have to do something about this. I can tell. And he goes, well, we want to give you a year to let the hormones and I said, no, you don't have to go through this. I want a hormone specialist. And I ended up getting a female hormone specialist. She is still my hormone specialist. But I started a hormone replacement basically right away. And I've been on hormone replacement ever since. So I take hormones every day because at 27, when you go into ovarian failure or menopause, I hadn't even at that point reached peak bone density. You don't hit peak bone density until about 35. And you need estrogen to do that for women. And I didn't have estrogen anymore. To this day, I recently had like an ultrasound and I find it comical. I laugh at these things. And you could just tell that the ultrasound technician was kind of like a little concerned because she couldn't find my ovaries. And I said, oh yeah, that's fine. She goes, what do you mean that's fine? I said, oh, like I had chemo 6 years ago and I went into menopause. So they're supposed to be very small. They're very hard to find now. I said, I don't produce my own hormones anymore. So, and she goes, oh, thank God. I was so worried that I was going to have to tell you something was wrong. And I said, no, it's totally normal. But I've been in menopause essentially since 27.
So what's the protocol for you today?
Today, I just take hormones on a daily basis.
And nutrition?
And my nutrition and my exercise. So I work out, well, I teach about 8 fitness classes a week right now. And for those, I do the workouts when I teach them. So that's at least 8 workouts.
So, I mean, for people watching this, I hope this podcast reaches so many people around the world. Diagnosed at 15, 19 years later, you're teaching 8 exercise classes a week.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. For me, and hopefully the audience, it redefines what MS can look like 2 decades out.
Yeah, I was very, like, when I was diagnosed back in 2007, I was told that there was a 50-50 shot of me being, like, secondary progressive wheelchair bound within the first, like, 10, 15 years. And I do a lot of work with, like, a lot of the other MS organizations, and I've talked to people, and that statistic has now changed. It's not a 50-50 shot. But that was what I was told when I was 15, that I'd probably be wheelchair bound at some point in my life. And so far, knock on wood, like I said, I teach fitness 8 times a week.
Now, you've gone through significant health challenges, but you've transformed those to motivate you and others. How did you do it?
I credit my parents. So, like I said, on the day that I was diagnosed and we were driving to the hospital and Double Vision by Foreigner comes on and my mom starts laughing and she doesn't know music. So this is a big deal for her. And she goes, oh, this kind of describes you right now. And I've always had the personality type where I go, okay, what's next? Like, what do we do? You can be sad for 24 hours, and then what's next? It could always be worse. No, it could always be worse. So, like, I don't know. It's just my personality type. I'm like, yeah, it could be worse.
It's a mindset.
It's a mindset. It could be worse. Could always be worse.
Now, are there any practices that you do that you could share with our audience on how you keep that mindset always, just getting to know you, tilted towards the positive and humorous?
Yeah. One, I believe in like just people telling their own truth. So I talk very openly about everything. IVF is obviously a part of my journey. So I actually blog about that now. It's the fitness. So I went on vacation in the Dominican, and my partner was like, what are you going to do for fitness while we're in the Dominican? And I said, oh, well, we're going to this wellness resort. And they unfortunately didn't have a bike. So I was like, I'm just going to do a spin class for myself in the wellness resort. But I went for a run 4 days while I was there. And he goes, if you go more than 48 hours without exercise, you can tell personality wise. It's like, you can tell. So just moving your body and eating well. When I eat crappy, you can tell. So it is a mindset, but it's the healthy habits that keep me going. And don't go around anyone in my family if we haven't exercised in like 48 hours.
Yeah, and that is, it's a lot easier to say you can do that than it is to actually put it into practice.
Yes.
And so, I mean, you've been in this for almost 20 years. How do you maintain the discipline without giving up?
So I feel like that's a question. So I come from it. My dad is an Ironman. I think he's done over 10 now. My sister is a professional triathlete. Like my mom works out now for like 5 days a week. She's retired and become a gym person. So it was something that we grew up with. And I remember because I hated running when I was younger. I didn't want to run. I didn't want to work out. When I was the moody teenager who got diagnosed, I didn't want to do any of that. And my parents sat me down when I was 18 and they said, we don't care what you do, but you have to do something. So it was really taking the time to find what I love. I love running. I have run tattooed on my foot. So I can't stop. But I found cycle class and boxing, and it changed my life. So I just kept going until I found that exercise that made me want to do it in the morning.
Now, in both of the two major health struggles that you've shared with us, the early menopause and multiple sclerosis, in both of these cases, there's been a lot. You've had to advocate for yourself.
Yes.
You've had to get in there and really fight for your own well-being. Can you tell us how hard that is for you to do? And how would you share with others how they can do it for themselves?
So I go prepared. And I will say, so back, like my first degree is in health or medical science. I did like a pre-med degree. Unfortunately, my MS was quite active. So I was like, there's no way I can do med school, which is when I pivoted and I did the nutrition route. But I remember being on Gilenya, and I remember not liking it, and it wasn't controlling my MS the way I wanted it to. And Lemtrada had just come out. And I always say I'm a neurologist's worst nightmare because I've gone to school and I know how to read all the art, like the scientific papers. So I had compiled all of my research, and then I went in to see my doctor I was at Sunnybrook Hospital at the time. And I said to him, we can have a discussion, but by the time I leave today, you're going to sign the paper and I'm switching to Lemtrada. And he goes, well, let's talk about it. It's brand new. No one's been on it. And I said, that's cool. Let's have a discussion. Then by the time I leave, unless you give me a valid and like very convincing reason why I shouldn't switch, I'm switching. And so we did. And that's what we've done. And I talk to people all the time, especially women, about having to advocate for themselves. Because statistically speaking, women, it takes longer to get diagnosed for pretty much anything. And our pain is written off a lot more easily, is going in prepared, doing your research. And when they say, well, it's not that, then go, well, what are 3 other options it can be? Like, let's have this dialogue. I want to have a dialogue with you. And I also tell people you can shop around for your doctor. So I have had neurologists that I did not like. I had neurologists that have told me that my diet and exercise didn't make a difference. People who had very different viewpoints of how I wanted to approach how I handle my life and my diagnosis. And I asked for a new neurologist. And I said, this is not a relationship that's going to be conducive to good health for me.
But so much of your story listening is you've just taken self-accountability. It's your body, it's your life.
It's my body, my choice.
You're fighting for your well-being.
Yeah. And it's like with the menopause, he said, well, we should wait a year. And I said, I'm not waiting a year. Give me my hormone specialist right now. And I said, and I want a female. And they said, okay. And she's still my doctor to this day. I saw her like a month ago and we check in and she goes, how are the hormones? And we kind of make tweaks. But I did that, and then there's actually research that has come out that shows for women entering menopause, the earlier you start your hormones, the better. It's detrimental to like wait to start those hormones. So I'm just like, why would I wait a year?
You know, this is obviously, and I hate to smile in this conversation, but I've had very similar moments in a doctor's office where it's gotten tense.
Yep.
And how do you, and for a lot of people, you come from an athletic family, you're obviously incredibly well educated, you're able to hold your own.
Yes.
What kind of advice can you give to people who may be really timid in that environment and feel like they're getting pushed in a direction that they don't want to be, or they're not being heard?
So the two things I say: one, always do your research, come prepared. Bring backup. Bring someone with you that you know will have your back in there. So when I was growing up, it was my parents. And it allowed me, because I had all those fundamental early years, that by the time I had to advocate for myself, I was like, I got this. But I have, like, when my partner goes to doctor's appointments, I go, do you want me to go with you? My mother-in-law had like a health thing, and I was like, tell me what the doctor is saying. Like, let's talk about it. And I'm like, I can be a sounding board for her. I'm a sounding board for my parents. Like, I am not a doctor, but it helps to have a third party that you can bounce those ideas off of. And if you need to, have them go with you. You're allowed to bring whoever you want.
Jessica, you have a really strict diet. So what diet are you following, and how do you stay on it in today's world?
So I follow what I call a plant-based diet. Vegan tends to be very triggering for people, so I say plant-based. No dairy. I eat so many fruits and veggies every day. We try to, in my house, I make most of our, make all of our food. So like if I want a cookie, it's a homemade cookie. I do have a piece of like dark chocolate every night, but for the most part, it's like no dairy, no meat, no eggs. Pretty much it is a vegan diet, and it is as little processed food as we can. So I will make everything from scratch if we can. If we've got the time, we will make it from scratch.
And how do you stay so disciplined on the diet?
You feel better. Part of when I went plant-based, some of it is for the animals. So there's the ethical reason for me as well. So like for me, when I see meat, I see like a baby pig, or I see a cow, and like it makes it really easy to not eat the item. And then when it comes to like the rest of it, everybody has slips, and that's why I always tell people when I work with them nutritionally, I said, like, you're going to slip up. You're going to eat something. You're going to have that thing that you really wanted. But I say that's okay. Like, you go, okay, that happened. Go to the next day. And so it tastes better. I feel better on it. And then we don't buy it. Like, there'll be times when I was like, oh, I wish I had bought insert food here when we were at the grocery store, but I'm home and I don't have it. So it's really easy to like not eat it because it's just not there.
Now, just listening to you, I really enjoy your perspective of life, of tackling like what's next. The problem comes. What are we going to do? What do we put into action? How do you think these health challenges have changed your overall perspective of your life?
I think they've made me very grateful. I will say they also made me very aware of the quality of people in my life. That's the one thing that I'm very grateful of for the MS, which sounds weird to say. But when I was younger, I dated a guy who didn't know I had MS yet. And I was telling this, I had gone to a conference that day, and I had said, oh, there was this woman, and she was talking, and like, she was telling a story. Her husband had left her when she had like a really bad MS relapse, and like all these terrible things had happened, but she was still standing there. And it was like a really great resiliency story. And this guy looked me in my eyes and went, oh, I would be so far gone. Like, I would be gone so fast. And I was like, okay, interesting to know. And then we never went on another date. And I just said, you have a nice life, probably not the person for me. But then like I said, I started the process for transplant in February of 2019. And that's when I met my fiance. And I think I told him on our second date that I had MS and that I was going to be doing a transplant. And he did not run away. He bought me my first ever video game and came and visited me in the hospital like 3 times a week. And I always asked him, I said, why did you stay? And he goes, oh, if I didn't hang out with chemo Jess, I didn't get post chemo Jess. And he's just been there for the last 7 years.
Right.
So when I think about all the things that I've learned, is it's really like the good people stay. It could always be worse. So be really grateful for everything you've got. And there's nothing a good plan can't solve.
Well, it's interesting you bring this up, and it's something we've never talked about on the podcast, but I guarantee a lot of young people would want to hear about is dating with MS. Because I was diagnosed at 19, so older than you.
But still dating.
But still in the dating years through my 20s and having to navigate that. For me, I was out of the gates real quick. That was my strategy. And I don't know if I did it right, but that was always, I put it right on the table as soon as I could, because I didn't want to be honest, didn't want to face that, what you went through.
I was like, it was pretty early. I think this was like our third date. So I was like, this is great. Because normally my rule was I always told within 3 to 5 dates. After that, I started being like, okay, by date 2. We'll go in by date 2. We can tell them that I have MS. And my partner, I think part of it was he had no idea what it was. And he had no idea what a stent was and so refers to transplant. But during my fertility harvest, he did give me every single injection. 3 months in, he gave me every injection for the fertility harvest and took me. I'm sure it probably scared his parents that their son was now dating a girl who was going through chemo and bald. But I have the best in-laws in the world. And I have the best partner, the best parents. But I use it could be very scary, I think, dating with MS, because it's a reason for people to leave. But I used it as a way to weed out the people that weren't right for me.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. And I said, if you can't handle it, tell me now.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. And for me, I had done so much research like you, and I was just so confident in my long-term outcomes.
Yeah.
I was pretty confident no matter what could come, I would just figure out a way.
And that's what, and like Chuck, he's fantastic. And he's just like, you tell me when there's a problem, but he's like, I know you got this. And that's been the last 7 years.
Now for me, in my journey, it took I was not part of the MS community whatsoever for the first 20 years. I just wasn't. Last decade, I've been quite involved. Have you been involved with the MS community, and why?
From day one, I was involved with the MS community. So I guess I'm from a very small town in Ontario. And when I got diagnosed, so I got my official diagnosis in August of that year. And the next year there was the MS walk, like the MS study MS walk. And my family was like, we should do it. Like, let's go out. And I was very hesitant too, because a lot of the times, like when you see on TV, it's not accurate portrayals of MS and all these. I was like, what if it's scary? I'm going to see all these people who are older than me and in wheelchairs. But we said, let's go do the walk. And I remember going to do the walk, and at the walk, they had those signs that says, I'm walking for, and then they had a red one that says, I have MS, that's why I walk. And my mom gave me that, and I put it on. And the whole walk, we had cameras following us, because I was very clearly the youngest person there with the I have MS, that's why I walk. And then they asked if they could ask our family questions. And then the MS Society came out with the summer camp for kids with MS.
Right.
And when I was 16 to when I was 23, I went to summer camp for kids with MS. And to this day, I have about 30 friends from that camp who are my age who have MS. I have what I call my MS little brother. His name is Tyrell. He thinks it's hilarious to introduce me as his big sister, because Tyrell's like 6'2" and black. And he's like, this is my big sister. And people are like, what? But we're family, and what was our bind was we both have MS. And when I went to MS summer camp, and I think this is probably also why I'm so comfortable with my MS, MS wasn't strange. You're at camp with 35 other kids who are 17 years old, who all have MS, and we'd get there and be like, I'm on Betaseron, what are you on? And then they'd be like, what's your injection schedule? Do you want to go to the health hut with me tonight? Like, let's go get our needles together. And that's really weird to talk about, but it normalized a lot of it.
Right.
And the camp was completely free. The MS Society paid for the camp.
Yeah.
And so then I ended up working for the MS Society at one point and running their peer support program. And I still do the peer support so people can reach out to me and ask me questions. And I just found there's a big MS community. And if something that I can do or talk to someone helps them, then I'm all for it.
And it's a unique community because the disease takes so long to play out that we're in it for most of our lives. Yeah,
you'll be in it by the time, my goal is to hit 110, which means I will have lived with MS for about 95 years, if I can make that goal.
Do you feel that now you've had a transplant that the MS is gone?
Well, when I asked my neurologist, and this one is interesting, so I have a letter that says it's gone. I actually have a letter that was written to the Alberta government that they can consider me cured. And the reason that I have that letter is because in Alberta with the MS. I disclosed that when I moved here, I disclosed I had MS to the driving bureau. And they make me do a driver's medical every 5 years. And I got tired. I was like, I don't want to give you $200 for you to sign a piece of paper and say I'm fine. So I went to my neurologist. I said, can you sign this paperwork for me so I don't have to pay my family doctor to do it? And he goes, I can't, because I can't sign off on your heart. But he says, I'll do you one better. And he wrote a letter to the government. He just said, for all intents and purposes, this doesn't apply to Jess anymore. He's like, if anything changes, we'll let you know. But she doesn't have to do this anymore.
Now, why is that? Is it the number of years of not having any progression on the MRI?
Yeah. He just said, for now, he's like, it's been 5 years. There's been nothing wrong. You can consider her stable. This does not apply to her. He said, if anything changes, we'll let you know. We'll be honest. We'll tell you. If it comes back in 10 years, we'll tell you. And so I have talked to my doctors and I said, like pregnancy is a big one for women with MS, and your highest risk of relapse is after you give birth. There's something for whatever reason that's protective when you're pregnant, but after you give birth, it's the highest risk of relapse. And this is one of Mom's biggest fear is she goes, what if something happens after you have a baby? What if it comes back? But my doctors don't think it will. They said they're like, it's like your immune system never knew you had MS.
What do you want to do for the next 10 years?
Kids. That is in the next 10-year plan. Keep teaching fitness as much as I possibly can. I'm writing more now, so I write a Substack and I share like nutrition meal plans every week, and I write about IVF and women's health and advocating for yourself and nutrition. I just want to keep doing that, and I want to be happy.
Jessica, we want the same for you. You're doing fantastic work. Your story is an inspiration to me, and I know it'll be a huge inspiration to our community. Thank you for sharing today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Hope and Health is made possible through generous donations. To learn more or support the show, visit mshope.com, where you'll find free science-based resources.